Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's KKE. Today we'll have our third Understanding Imaging KKE, and we'll be talking about post-installation tasks and pretty much anything that comes after the deployment. All right, with me is my cohort, Ron. If you want to go say hello, Ron.
Howdy, folks.
All right. Okay, before we do begin, we have our usual information we'd like everyone to be aware of if you haven't been to one of our sessions before. All right, so the first thing is Backyard Boot Camp. All right, we had our first initial run earlier this spring. Basically, this is classroom-style training. We will come out to all these different cities that you'll see down below. We'll bring our equipment with us. So you'll be free to break our K1 and our K2, not your own production environment, while you learn all the newest K1 and K2 best practices and features. It's really great training for anyone who might be new in your organization, as well as anybody who might just want to get a refresher. Maybe you haven't gotten trained in a long time and just want to learn all those new features and so on. Okay, so you can get all the information you'll need for this program at casebootcamp.com. We have New York, Chicago, and I believe Austin still coming up, starting back up in August. All right, so upcoming KKE sessions, we have obviously today we're doing our Understanding Imaging. We'll have an asset session tomorrow. We've got a little open forum sprinkled in over the next couple weeks. Next Tuesday, we will be doing our last Understanding Imaging of the theme. We'll be going over Mac imaging. We'll be doing an update because there were some changes in the way that the K2 does that. Right? And then towards the end of the month, we will be ending with labels, notifications, and reports. Oh my. So lots of great things there. We've got our resources here. So our new support site is support.software.dell.com. There you'll find knowledge base articles, all of the video tutorials and the KKEs that we're posting here. You'll find all the downloads as far as hot fixes, new versions, as well as utilities for the K1 and K2 there. Make sure you can log in and make sure that you can download. Right? Make sure you have the right entitlements. ITninja.com, we'll be talking about that a little bit later on today as well, but great collaborative site for you and your fellow colleagues. You can read blogs and you can post questions and answer other questions, as well as see deployment info for all sorts of different applications. We also have case.com/KKE. This is going to be your site that you'll want to use for registering and seeing what is upcoming in the KKE program. Case.uservoice.com is the site that you'll want to go to make your voice heard. Right? You want to see some new features or changes in the product, you'll head out there, search to see if someone has already made a suggestion and vote for it. Otherwise, create your own suggestion and then get everyone to vote for it. Our product teams do absolutely read this site every week, so make sure that you get your information uploaded there. Case.com/newsletter. This is a newsletter that comes out from the training team here at Case. And it's about once every month or 2 months, and it's got tips and tricks, and we'll answer questions, upcoming events, upcoming versions, previews, things like that. And then we have Case Connect. We have a link there for KKE customers, and Case Connect is a kind of like a IT Ninja-like program, but it is exclusive to customers who do sign up. It is free. Basically, we'll have you do little different things that will reward you with points, and you can trade those points in for prizes. We'll also do Case Connect only events. Recently, we did a 6.4 preview for our Case Connect customers, so definitely recommend signing up for that. And for all the things that we've just talked about, including the boot camp, Ron has gone ahead and put those links into the chat window. So you can go ahead and check out all those resources there. All right, so anything that you see today from our K1s or K2s will be the versions in front of you. Highlighted in red just basically means that something has come out recently, right? So you want to make sure that you go ahead and check your versions and compare them to what we see here. So for the K1000, we've got a 6.3 with applied hotfix there. And then we also have the K1000 agent bundle with an applied hotfix as well. We have the K2000, which we have we have 3.7 Service Pack 1, which did release not too long ago, but we also do have a hotfix on top of that, and that will be important. We'll be talking about that next week. We have an RSA version there as well. And then our K1000 Go mobile app, we generally don't put that in red because that'll be red all the time. But you can go ahead and get the free Go mobile app from the Apple App Store or Google Play Store and connect into your K1000 and get your service desk tickets, your inventory, all sorts of neat information about your devices and so on. All right, so what are we talking about today? All right, today we're going to talk, we're going to take a look at our imaging process overview to get an understanding of where we are in the process here, right? And then we're going to talk about two different phases of post-installation tasks. The first phase is what we call mid-level task, and the second is going to be our true post-installation tasks. Right, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A, and we're going to be getting into some very detailed information about some of these tasks, some popular requests that we get out there with customers. All right, so let's take a look at that process overview that if you've been attending for the last few weeks, right, you're going to be familiar with this. Right, and the first one is, this is the imaging process overview, and this is the path that you want to take, right, when we're creating our Gold Master image and when we're ready to deploy, right? And today, obviously, we're talking about the deployment phase, right? Whereas in the earlier sessions, we were talking about the preparation and the configure and the capture phases. Right now, we're going to focus on that deployment phase today. And in that deployment phase, right, if you were here last week with the SysPrep KKE, right, we kind of broke down the SysPrep process, right, and how it fit into the overall imaging process, right? But the two that are highlighted here, right, that's what we're going to be talking about today, and that's what you will, the different phases and where they come in the deployment process, right? That's what's going to be important. Right, so you can see our mid-level tasks in the middle column at the last thing there, and then our post-installation tasks towards the end there, okay, on the right side. Right, so we're going to be focusing on those two specific portions of our deployment process. Right, and Ron has put in some links to two articles here. One is our system imaging best practices, which is what we outlined in our original Understanding Imaging Process Overview KKE, which should be posted very soon to the video archive. And that's a knowledge-based article you can read about the process. Then we also have a link to the K2000 Deployment Workbench, which has a lot of the tools that we have been discussing both last week during the SysPrep KKE and then this week as well, and the few that we're going to be talking about in just a moment. All right. So now that we have an understanding of kind of where we are in the process, let's take a look at the mid-level tasks first. All right. So first thing, we have to understand what a mid-level task is, and with the mid-level tasks, right, we have to pay attention to the details, right? So first thing that we want here is the runtime environment, right? And the runtime environment, when we are creating application or batch script type tasks in our K2000, right, we have an option for the runtime environment. And generally, and what we're focusing on these last few here, right, is generally our runtime environment is going to be Windows. Right? And that will make our task, right, a post-installation task that will happen after our machine boots into Windows. However, right, if we wanted to have it run as a mid-level task, and I just noticed we missed something here, but we want to change the runtime environment to K2000 boot environment for Windows, right? And that will make it run as a mid-level task. And the mid-level task happens after the deployment is finished up, right? Whether this be a scripted install or system image, right? Obviously, we've been focusing on system imaging, but obviously these will still work for scripted installs as well, right? It's after the deployment, but while you're still inside the KBE, still inside the boot environment, right? And the driver feed is a great example of a mid-level task. Right? Now, there are not many mid-level tasks that you might be doing custom, right? There's a few, and we're going to talk about a few in just a few moments here, right? But, you know, there might not be many, but there's one very specific thing you need to remember when creating your mid-level tasks is that if you're working with executables, right, or MSIs, right, anything that is architecture specific, right, we are inside the boot environment, right? And when we are inside the boot environment, architecture needs to match, right? We cannot run an x86 executable file inside our 64-bit KBE, right? The subsystem does not exist there, right? So if you're going to try to run executables in your mid-level, at the mid-level, right, you need to make sure that you're working with consistent and matching architecture files to the KBE. All right. Let's take a look at some sample tasks that you might be working with, right? And three that we're going to talk about specifically today are set computer name, right? The auto logon count, and then the UVNC copy files to workstation. And we'll get more into those three as we go on. But this is some sample things. And by the way, all three of these items can be gathered from the K2000 deployment workbench, which you can get to by the link that Ron sent in the chat window. You can also, if you log into your K2000, you go to the tools module, right? Everything can be gathered there as well. Okay, so let's get some more detail here. All right, so get set computer name. Now, get computer name is a pre-installation task, right? And that will run before your deployment begins, before you partition and so on, right? I don't want to really focus too much on get computer name, right? Because that's obviously a pre-installation task, but it goes along with set computer name, right? And one of the important things, and one of the things that you are going to be worried about when you're doing your deployments is, how do I name my computer, right? And get set computer name, right, is a set of naming tasks that work for both scripted installs and system images. Again, we're kind of focused on the system images, but can still be used there. The system image must be sysprepped, and I hope everybody here, after they watched last week's KKE, that they are sysprepping if you haven't been doing it before. Because we are running this at the mid-level, you will find both x86 and x64 versions of both get and set computer name. And what happens is, you can see the basic workflow down below, right? We've got our get computer name, which will either pop up a dialog box or gather the local name that is already there, right? And there's a README file that goes along with get set to give you all the different command lines that you're worried about. Right. We're going to gather that name, right, and then we're going to store that in the KBE, right, in the X drive there, right, in memory, right. Our deployment is going to complete, right, and then our mid-level tasks are going to kick in, and set computer name is going to kick in, right, and it's going to inject that name into the unattend file that is there. That is the reason why our system images must be sysprepped in order for set computer name to work. The nice thing about get set computer name is that when you are doing deployments with this, when Windows boots up for the first time, it has the correct name, right? Not some random name, not some template name that you might have been working with, right? So any sort of post-installation tasks that you might deploy, such as antivirus and domain, right, will be using the correct name of the machine, right, from the get-go. Right? We don't have to add a name and then reboot again just to get the name in there. Right? So set computer name can be used with get computer name in order to gather the current name of the machine that you're redeploying to. Right? If it's a school and you're re-imaging your lab, right, the machines are going to stay the same. Right? Or if it's a brand new computer, we can use that dialog option in order to pop up a little dialog box at the pre-level. Let's not focus too much on that. Right. Set computer name can also be used by itself, right? We wouldn't use get computer name in this scenario, right? But you can see what we can do is we can use it by itself with variable replacement, Right? So if you name your computers based on the serial number of your machines, or if you name them based on the chassis type and the model name and then the year, right, or the date or something like that, right? We've got a whole bunch of different variables that you can work with here with set computer name. Right? You can see here's some of the variables that you have available to you. All right. And when set computer name runs at the mid-level, again, it will inject that name into the unattend file so that when Windows boots up, right, it's going to automatically have that name right from the get-go. All right. So get set computer name. It's up on our deployment workbench. Definitely recommend taking advantage of it. I wish I had found it sooner than I did when I was a customer. By the time I had learned about it, I wished I had been using it for several years beforehand. It really does make your life so much easier when you're dealing with naming, especially if you're like where I was in the education world, where you're re-imaging and imaging so frequently, right? It's no fun to have to spend an extra few minutes each time and rename your machines, right? Let's use these tools to help us automate, right? Let's work a little bit smarter here, okay? All right, so the next one, right, setting the auto logon count. This one is actually very important for your system images, right? Because if we ever work with scripted installs, it's very easy to change the auto logon count of our deployments. And we're going to talk a little bit more to that specific item and why we want to change this number once we get to the post level, right? But basically, the amount of times we want to automatically log in to our deployment, okay? When you sysprep, that number is going to be included in the sysprep process. It's going to be built in. It's not easy to change that number, right, without, you know, re-sysprepping your system image, right? So no fun if we just want to change this one little thing. So what we do is we have this task that you can import. Again, it's from our deployment workbench. And what that auto logon count will do is it modifies just that one logon count parameter that's in your unattend.xml file. You can change this number anywhere from 0 to 99, right? And the one that gets imported is a template, and you can duplicate that template and modify it to your heart's content, right? So that you can have one that changes it to 10, one that changes it to 6, one that changes it to 20, depending on your needs of your deployments. They can be, so what this is this is slipstreamed in, very similar to how set computer name is slipstreaming the name into the unattend file. We're going to slipstream this change in live. So your system image might have 2 by default, right? But there might be a need, okay, now down the line I need it to be 7, right? I will use this task, and you can see down below where I'm kind of pointing in the picture there, where logon count is, it's going to replace that number, okay? There are some additional command line parameters that you can work with, although these are not required. Right? We have a debug command that you can use. So if you're having some issues getting this to work, then you can debug it. We also, if your unattend file is for whatever reason after you've sysprepped not in the right location, right, you can put a path to the unattend file that you would like to change. Right? If you're just using our normal sysprep creator wizard process, right, you don't really need either of those options unless you're running into some problems, okay? But highly recommend this, and we'll talk more about where this becomes more applicable once we hit the post-install phase. And the last one, this is one that is really neat, especially if you have a very long post-install path, right? And basically, what we're doing here is we're going to be using that same exact Ultra VNC that's built into the boot environment, right? So anyone here who may not be aware, right, while you're inside the boot environment, there is a VNC client built into our boot environments by default that you can use VNC program or the Java web viewer that's built in to go and view what is going on with the boot environment. Let's watch the image and all the pre and mid tasks, right? But once you hit the post level, by default, you're kind of left out in the dark unless you're using the progress module. But if you really want to watch it, if you want to see it happening inside the boot environment, you can use these tasks, and there's actually 3 tasks. One is a mid-level, and then there's 2 post-installation tasks. And what happens is this will copy the exact same tools that are copied into your KDE down to the local machine. It's going to use the same exact credentials that the KDE version is going to use. Right? It's going to temporarily modify the firewall settings to allow the VNC to get in. Right? It's going to survive through any reboots. Right? Again, going back to our auto login a little bit. And then it will get rid of the VNC files at the end. So if you don't want VNC local on the machine, it will get rid of it, clean itself up. But what it allows you to do is have VNC available during the post-installation level of your deployment. Now, if you only have 1 or 2 tasks, right, or 3 tasks at your post level, this may not be that useful because your post-install tasks are going to go by so quick. But if you know that your post-installation tasks usually take maybe 10 minutes or longer, right, then this might be useful if you want to VNC and see what's going on, right? This can be also very useful if you have an error in your deployment and you're not at the machine at the time. You'd like to remote into that machine and work with the options that you have when you error out, right? The task error page. Okay, so very useful. Again, this is also on our deployment workbench. Highly recommend at least downloading it. Right, it's an import. There's 3 import tasks. Right, 1 is a mid-level, 2 at the post level. You'll see there's the mid-level as copy files, and then there's 2 post levels. 1 is the run, and run is the quit. And you'll see where they are in the process here and where you should put them in your deployment in the picture here. All right. So those are some of the common mid-level tasks that you'll want to use in your deployments that at least I recommend. Right. So now let's get into the post-installation task level of things here. So I've given you a sample list here. Again, you can see our UVNC run, right, and quit at the end there, right? And what I really want to focus on with this picture here is the order in which we are running our post-installation tasks, right? I'm running the UVNC run at the beginning, obviously, right, so that it's going to encompass and bookend all of our tasks, right? But then what I like to do is I like to do any sort of tasks or registry changes or any sort of batch scripts that I might have, right? Anything that might affect settings and so on our deployment, right? Then I like to do our applications, right? Adobe Reader and a CD Burner XP Pro and Java and then Firefox, right? Any other applications you might be working with, Office and so on, right? The general applications there. Then I'm going to follow that up with my agent installations, and we're going to get more into detail about those 2 tasks that you see there with the agent, right? But I'm going to do my agent after that so that when that first initial inventory for my K1000 hits, right, all of my changes have been made as far as scripting and software is concerned. We don't want any potential conflicts. If we install our agent before I install Firefox, right, and then my K1 inventories and starts kicking off its managed install while the K2000 is still doing its deployment, right, we could have some conflicts here. All right. After the agent, then I recommend your antivirus installer. Right now, I'm not going to get too deep into antivirus installers in today's session because there's so many different versions out there and so many different ways to deploy them. But you absolutely do not want to include them in your gold master image. You want to have them as post-install tasks. The reason why we're doing it after the agent is that there are some AV, right, that will not let the agent install because the whitelists haven't been loaded up, to that agent yet at the initial install, right? So you'll want to make sure that the agent gets in first, then your AV. Once the AV is completed, then we're going to join the domain. And today we're actually going to be taking a look at join domain tasks that I like to work with. And we'll talk more about that in just a few moments. And then the join domain is the last item that you want outside of the UVNC quit. And what's going to happen is after that's the join domain is complete, UVNC cleans itself up, right? The K2 is then once again going to restart your computer and clean up, right? And clean up after itself. Right. That includes deleting unattended files, deleting any of the post-install task files that were copied down to the machine earlier, right? But it's going to clean up anything that the K2 did to that local machine, and then restart the machine, right? That's why I like to do my domain join last, because I don't have to have an additional reboot after that domain join. All right. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that we need to know about post-install tasks here. All right, so first thing is IT Ninja, right? This is going to be your new friend if you are not already using it. We have under the software tips section, you can go ahead and look for the name of the software, and this is very important. A lot of people this is something I got used to. Everyone always says, oh, I have Adobe. Right? Really, they mean I have Adobe Reader, and the name of the software is Reader, not Adobe or Adobe Reader. Right? So you want to look for the words Reader. Right? You want to look for the words Flash. You want to look for the words Java. Right? Not the manufacturer or vendor name. Right? The name of the actual software. But what IT Ninja has under the software tips section is deployment tips. Right, content information about that piece of software, that is uploaded by your fellow colleagues, and this information has all the command line parameters that you can use with that software. What are the different settings and the different options that you can use? You'll also find, other than the deployment tips under the software tips section, many people create blogs. Right? Many people create a blog about here's how you install Office, right? Here's how you install Java, right? Anything like that, you'll see those up on the site as well if you do a search, right? So become familiar with IT Ninja. Please, what I always recommend, go create an account. It is free. If you do not find something up on IT Ninja and you need to go look on Google or on the vendor site or wherever you find it, if you call up the vendor, whatever it is, once you discover that information, please put that on IT Ninja so that the next person who's looking for it will be able to find it there as well, right? If everyone just kind of has that, the MO and how they operate with IT Ninja, right, we're going to help each other out. Okay, and that's the idea of IT Ninja, right? Let's not try to reinvent the wheel every time. Someone else has already figured this out. The next thing that we want to work with, especially with our post-installation tasks, is you always want to make sure that you are working with what are called administrative, enterprise, or offline installers. Right? These are different versions that you can download of software. Sometimes the vendors will make them easy to find. Sometimes they will not be easy to find. Right? But what you do not want is the stub installers that can be downloaded from their main page. Right? So things like Adobe Reader and Mozilla Firefox, those are applications that if I download them from the main page, Chrome as well, right? If I download from the main page, I get a little tiny file that's then going to go out to the internet and download the newest version. Right? Those stub installers can include, do not let you usually work with the command line parameters. We don't normally want to work with those because we don't want to hit the internet up every time we're doing the software deployment. We also may not want any of that, extra or value-added software items that are, in that package, right? The offline installers are just going to be just the complete files that you need to install that software. Sometimes you need to do a search for those files for your vendor. Sometimes IT Ninja will have the links out to the files. What I do want to warn you is look for any specific agreements or EULAs that your organization might need to apply for. Things like Adobe Reader and Flash Player and Shockwave and so on do require your organization to fill out a form in order to deploy using those files. The files are still available. They're still free. This doesn't cost you money, right? But you still need to apply with, Adobe in order to get, officially be able to do them. So keep an eye on that, right, in case you see those anywhere. Sometimes vendors will have them hidden, right? Unless you are, if you are a customer of their enterprise level products, then you'll have access to download the full packages. Sometimes the software themselves will generate them. I know the antivirus software that I worked with, the console would actually generate the offline installer. Right? So there's all different ways that you can get access to these files. Once you have the command line, once you have the package, please test your applications locally, right? On a PC. Don't assume it's going to work from the K2, because if it doesn't work locally, it's definitely not going to work coming down from the K2. Right? Make sure that you have the right command properties. Make sure check the logs for that application. Make sure it runs and it works properly, that it did everything you asked it to do. This is where virtual machines and snapshots really come and are very helpful. All right. Sometimes it's also good to test those installers on a machine out in the wild that might, especially if something like Java. Right. Let's test my Java installer out with my piece of software that requires Java. Let's make sure it works before I just, decide to start using the most up-to-date version. Okay. Reboot required. This is a little checkbox that you're going to find on all of your post-installation tasks. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell the local device, hey, restart after this particular task has completed. So there are some pieces of software that require you to restart after the deployment of that application is done in order to finish up, right? In order to make it full and complete, right? Nothing else can move on until this is done. So we got to restart. So we can have tasks that are set up that way. If you have a task that is set to the checkbox of reboot required, that's where our automatic logons come into play, right? So that task we talked about earlier, right, with setting the auto logon count in unattend, right? If I created my image with 2 auto logins, but now I have 3 pieces of software that need to reboot, has reboot required, now I need my number to be 5. Right? So I need to change that number, and I can use that task that we talked about earlier to do that. Right? So keep in mind with those. What I like to do is in the name and the title of my post-install task, at the end, I'll do a -RR so that I know just by looking at my post-installation task list that those tasks require a reboot. Right? So that way I can just just a good reminder to myself if I'm looking at the list, okay, I need this many extra reboots. When you're working with multiple files, right, we're going to talk about zipping them up, right? You want to select the files that you want to zip up, not zip the parent folder. Now, you could zip the parent folder and upload that into your application task, but then when you call the MSI or batch script or executable or whatever it ends up being, right, there's an extra level of folder hierarchy to move through first. So I recommend, right, if you select the files and then send those to a zip file, right, then we can just call whatever name is at the root level of the batch script or the executable, whatever it ends up being. All right. So make sure to keep an eye on that. Right. Maybe that's why the task is failing and so on. Also, make sure to use normal compression. A lot of us will always recommend that you use a tool called 7-Zip, right? It's a freeware, open source utility for zipping and unzipping and working with archives and so on. It's a great tool. I install it on every computer I work with. But it also has the capability of doing greater compression, right, or a different type of compression. We don't want to do that. We just want to use normal compression and leave it at that. Otherwise, it may not be able to unzip on the other side. Okay. All righty. So let's take a look now. And one of the things I always work with some customers on are some common batch scripts, right, that you might need to work with in your environment. The first 2 here are specific to Windows activation. If you did not build in your activation into SysPrep, right, or let's say your organization that has multiple different activation schemes depending on the building that we're targeting. I had one customer that was basically a company that had purchased several other companies, right? So the IT departments hadn't truly centralized yet, right? But he was in charge of everybody's IT departments. They had multiple different activation schemes, some KMS, some Mac, right? But in order to create a centralized image, we couldn't build that into the image, right? So we use these tasks when we need to, right? And what we can do is we can enforce the Mac or KMS activation just by using these batch scripts here. Right? And when we create these scripts, again, these are just going to be batch scripts in the K2000. They're going to be the runtime environment of Windows. And Ron has posted them into the chat window for all to copy out. Now, you'll notice that there are a few items in red in our script. That is where you need to make some changes. Right? So in the Mac activation, we need to put in the actual multiple activation key, right, that you download from the Volume License Center. In the KMS activation, you're going to put the fully qualified domain name of your KMS server. Now, in both cases of dealing with activation, right, with KMS activation, it's going to eventually find the KMS server based on DHCP or domain, depending on what OS you're working with, right? And for Mac activation, right, we could just enter the key, and then within 72 hours, it will go out to the internet and finally activate, right? But if we do that second line, it's going to activate now, right? We don't have to worry about it later. It's going to happen now. We can shut down the machine. Let's not worry about it, okay? The third one is enabling remote desktop. This could be really useful, especially if you use remote desktop in your organization and you don't want to build that into your system image. And I'd recommend not building into the system image, right? Maybe there are going to be cases where you don't want RDP enabled, right? So we can just use a post-install task to make the change when we want it, right? And this is really nice if you're using your K1 and you have device actions set up to remote into those machines. Well, let's make sure that they are it is turned on and enabled. And in that case, right, we're doing two things. We're using the netsh command, right, in the first line, right, to make sure we can punch a hole through the firewall to make sure remote desktop is enabled. And in the second line, right, we've got a registry key change. And even if you do not want to enable remote desktop, maybe you're a BombGuard customer, right, you don't want RDP on, you can still use that second line as a template to modify other registry keys in your environment, in your deployments, right? So we need to know where the key is, right? What the value of the key that we want to change is, right? What kind of key is it, right? Is it D word or not, right? And then what is the actual value? You can see the 0 towards the end. So we can use that as a template to change anything else in registry that we might want to change along the way. All right, so here's some very common scripts that you guys can go ahead and grab from the chat window. K1000 Agent Installer. I always have to talk about this. I always like to talk about this. There's two tasks that you're going to find that you need to work with. And most of you probably already have a K1000. If not, then when you get one, and we hope you do, right, you'll be prepared. All right, but there's two tasks here. There's a task called Apply KUID to K1000 Agent. And if you are re-imaging a computer that already has an agent on it, you will want to use this task. Basically what happens is this, right? A hidden pre-installation task is actually going to capture the KUID if it's present, right, before any of your custom pre-installed tasks run through, right? So before we partition and format the drive, right, we're going to go and see, we're going to see that registry key, and we're going to copy that and hold on to that KUID. And then when we reinstall the K1000 agent, right, we want to add this task prior to the K1000 agent installer. Technically, it will work post, but we always recommend prior to the K1000 agent installer. Right, and it's going to apply that KUID back down to that machine so that the same device and asset trail in your K1000 will be preserved. Right, we do not want the K1000 agent installer creating a new KUID, which would create new records, use up another license, right, and sever the ties with the old assets. right? It was Bob's machine before I reimaged. It's still Bob's machine now, so we want to preserve that KUID, which is the case unique identifier, right? We want to preserve that number, so we can use that task, right? And then when we install the K1000 agent itself, first thing you always want to make sure is that you're using the most up-to-date installer, right? Why make the K1 do more work than it needs to do, right? If you have an installer going, right, let's give it the most current one that the K1 can do so that we don't have to wait for any deployments to work with it, right? What you'll see is that here's the command line that we can work with in our for our K1000 agent installer, right? And what you have here are two things that you need to modify, right? The first one is going to be the name of the MSI. If we upload a new package for the K1000 agent installer, right, then we want to make sure we change that name in our post-installation task so it references the right package name, the right MSI. And then you'll also see a host equals parameter, right? And this is when the K1000 agent installer runs around, it will point it to this K1000, and you'll want to use your fully qualified domain name here, right? So that if anyone's trying to access externally, right, that will be a resolvable name, right? You don't really want to use internal IP addresses. Right? We want to use those FQDNs. So those are the two parameters, two things that you'll want to modify for this task. So we'll want to make sure that we add in our applied KUID to K1000 agent if we're doing a re-image of a machine, right, or a redeployment to a machine that has a K1000 agent already. And then when we want to get our K1 agent in there, right, then we're going to modify it to point to our K1 specifically. Okay. All right. Lastly, always get asked this. Every training session I go through, every training, a boot camp I work in, right? How do I join my machine to the domain? Right? So I like to use this specific set of tasks. It requires a few extra scripts. Actually, it came through in WebEx finally correct for once, right? And it's posted in there by Ron, so everyone can gather this and use it, right? It's two files that we're going to work with. Right? The first file is going to be a PowerShell script, right? And when we create this, we can just create a new text file. We're going to call it, we're just going to save it as a .ps1 file. We can call it join domain, right? .ps1, for example. And in our script, you'll notice there are a few items that we do need to change, right, in order to make it our script. So we're going to do domain.com, right? What is our domain? And you do not have to capitalize them. I just capitalize them so that they stick out more in my script because I don't have it read in the script itself. It's read for today's purposes. All right, so domain.com, so, case.com, whatever it ends up being, whatever your domain name is, right, and for your domain server, right? The password, right, that is going to be used in that to join to the domain. The username that you are going to use to join the domain. Highly recommend single service, single-use service accounts, right? Create an account to join things to the domain, right? Do not use your administrator level, domain admin account here, right? If you're just trying to test to see if it works, sure, but long-term, do not use that, right? Create an account that does this, right? And then you'll also see OU path. And the unique thing about this script that I really like is that if the machine is brand new to the domain, it will move it to that OU path. Highly recommend turning on the advanced view features in your Active Directory users and groups program, and then you can go into the attributes of a specific container or OU, and you can get that full OU path right from the attributes there. Right? If it's brand new to the domain, if that machine object does not exist, it will put it into that OU. If the machine object does exist, it will rejoin it back to the domain, but keep it where it was already, right? Which is really helpful, right? If you are not the person that needs to move it to the right OU, and sometimes you got to ask that network person, hey, can you move all these machines? And it may not be done right away, but you've got group policies that need to apply. Right? This is very important, especially in a larger IT shops that have desegregated, controls. when I was in charge, I did everything, right? So, so we create our PS1 here. Then we have our join, we create a batch script, and this batch script is going to have our PowerShell information, and it's going to point to the PowerShell script that we just created. All right, so I created one called joindomain.ps1. You can have multiple PowerShell scripts. Just make sure that for each PowerShell script, there is one batch script, right? So if you had 6 different OUs that you wanted to join, create 6 different PowerShell scripts and 6 different batch scripts that point to each individual PowerShell script, okay? Once we have these 2 files created, we're going to get them ready to get to our K2000. Right, so we're going to prepare our files first, right? We're going to locate the PS1 and batch script files, and you know what? You have 6 and 6, zip them all up together, okay? Remember, we want to select our files, not the parent folder, okay? Then we're going to create a new post-install task in our K2000, right? It's going to be an application task. The runtime environment is going to be Windows, all right? We're going to upload the zip file that we just created, and the parameter is going to be the batch script name, right, joindomain.bat, okay? If you had more than one PowerShell and batch script combination inside the zip, go ahead and just duplicate that task and then change the parameter to be a different batch script each time, right? So duplicate it, different batch script name, duplicate it, different batch script name, so you now have 6 join domain post-install tasks, right, and then we can add them to our different deployments as necessary. Okay, again, all of that was put into your post-installation task there, into the chat window, and you can go ahead and use this to create post-install tasks to join the domain. Right? If we cut 5 minutes out of your deployment times by using all of the tasks that we've talked about here today, right, that will save you a lot of time. Right? I used to do 1,000 deployments a summer. Right? That's 5,000 minutes I would have saved myself. Right? To me, that's always worth it. Okay? All right.
I don't know, that doesn't seem like a lot of time.
All right. So that's all we have for you today, though, right? So we're going to talk next week about Mac imaging, and that's going to wrap up our Understanding Imaging theme for the month. We hope you have enjoyed it. We are going to be posting the links to all of these KKEs up on our deployment into our video archive, as well as into the System Imaging Best Practices KB article, so it's all nice and together. Right? But we're also going to give everybody an opportunity to ask some questions as well. Okay? All right. So in a few moments, Ron is going to open up the phones for everybody. Please feel free, if you have any background noise, to mute your lines. You can use the chat window to ask some questions. You can use the Q&A panel, and Ron will take care of you. All right, so I want to thank everybody and hope you have some good questions here. And Ron, there is a question in there for you now.
Got it. All right, folks, I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you.
All righty, so Beth asked in the chat, is there a way to set computer names for new hard drives, assuming she means computers, based on position in the room? We follow a certain method of naming computers based on where they are in the room, using a building -room -number. Currently, I have to do this manually whenever the lab computers or hard drives get replaced. Beth, there's definitely some ways we can potentially handle this. I like my hedging my bet there. There's definitely potentially, maybe, a way we can do this. If all else fails, the absolute worst case, the get set computer name that we have nowadays, and there should be a more detailed naming KKE in our recording archive, Beth, that you can go watch, that goes into all the different options and how they work and so forth. But at the worst case scenario, if you know all of your computers, say the MAC addresses or the serial numbers or something like that, of all your computers, and you know what names you want each of those computers to have, then you can create a very simple 2-column spreadsheet, Beth. You can give that to the get set computer name that we have the tool that Andrew had talked about that you can watch the other KKE on. And you can tell it to use that file using the proper command line options to determine, based on which computer it's actively deploying to at the moment in time, it look that computer up in the spreadsheet and grab the associated computer name and give it to the computer. So that's absolute worst case, Beth. You can create that simple spreadsheet and use get set computer name to name your computers. But alternatively, if there's some other way, I mean, we have the get set, the basic way where you can have it if the computer already has the name you want it to have, get it, set it aside for a moment, and put it back at the end of the deployment process. You can absolutely do that. If you're re-imaging an existing computer. Alternatively, you can use the dialog option that Andrew mentioned earlier, where in the get and the pre-install area, when you're doing an image deployment to a machine, it pops up a dialog on screen, right, on the computer you're deploying to, and by default it waits for 10 minutes. And you can type it in, hit OK, and then it will put that computer name back when it's all done. Okay? Does that help, Beth? Excellent, excellent. You are most welcome. All right. What's next, folks? All right, Chris put a question into chat. Chris, you sent this one to host privately. You might, any subsequent ones, you might send to both panelists, to all panelists rather than just to me. So both Andrew and I can see it. I had a question about driver feed when deploying an image. I have driver feed enabled and imaged an Optiplex 9020, but it did not install the video drivers. Is that something that I have to manually add? Also, do I have to download and install each hardware package? You got a couple of questions there. Let me address the first one first. The Optiplex 9020 model you're deploying to, you said that you subscribed to it, Chris, in the driver feed, in the Dell driver feed, and it successfully completed downloading, such that when you go into the driver feed list and you see Optiplex 9020 and the operating system and architecture that you chose, and hopefully it's the appropriate one, the correct one, it says installed into driver, into the share. Installed into share, I think is what it says next to it, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. So then did you know that you can browse to the drivers _ post install share of the K2000? You can double click on the Dell folder and then find the Optiplex 9020 folder. I don't know what exactly it's going to be called, OP 9020 or Optiplex Space 9020 or something along those lines. And you can go in there, and there'll be different folders for you know, the video drivers and the audio drivers and so on, the network drivers and whatnot. And you can see if there are actually any video drivers in there. First of all, I wonder. First thing, if I back up a step, I wonder if maybe you subscribed to the wrong OS flavor for that particular model, Chris.
I'm looking
right
now. It shows.
Yeah. If you find it. Yeah, Windows 7 64-bit, you say?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, verify that. So then you can browse to the drivers _ post install share, and see if there's even anything there. Right now, the driver feeds are going to include only drivers for the components that don't already have drivers baked into Windows for them. So for instance, if Windows 7 straight off the DVD already has video drivers for an Optiplex 9020, I don't know if it does or not, but let's say it does, right? Dell might not make a third-party driver for that particular component. Any vendor might not, right? So keep that in mind also. I'm sure that Dell does make a video driver for that particular model, but you know, it is a potential gotcha that you could run into in another situation. Let's see. The other thing is making sure that when you are in the boot environment on an Optiplex 9020, making sure that the K2000 is discovering the model of that device and looking for the drivers for that device, for that model, in the correct way. So, for instance, when you query Windows about what make and model the machine it's running on is, it has a couple of different places where it stores that information. And depending on which of the locations you query from within Windows, it might give you two completely different answers. Okay? So one of the things you can do is you can run, if you browse out to the drivers_post install share of your K2000, and you go into the feed tools folder, you can run the driver feed discovery tool.vbs, I think is what it's called, Chris. Okay.
Yeah, I see.
Run it on, so get on one of these Optiplex 9020s, and you know, that's running Windows 7 64-bit, even better. Okay. And simply run that tool, and it'll pop right on screen and tell you the exact folder that if you were trying to deploy this operating system to this model of device, the exact folder structure within drivers_post install that it would look for the drivers in. Okay.
Okay.
So just verify that you have the right drivers in the right location that will actually be used by the deployment. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Now, the second question, I'm not sure I understand. What do you mean download and install each hardware package?
I guess through the driver feed, I thought that would be automatically pulled from that.
It is, and it should get every single third-party driver that's necessary, every Dell driver that's necessary for that particular model, for that particular operating system. It should be fully all-inclusive. Now, that's only drivers, though, Chris, okay? So you know how sometimes a video card or even a network card or a sound card will have additional software that you could install that maybe shows up down by the clock, right, that you can click and have additional functionality? Those are not drivers, okay? Those are just software packages, software installs, software applications, right? They give you, they kind of sit in that gray area between an application and a hardware driver, right? But we don't consider them drivers. Dell doesn't make them available in the feed, and they don't get downloaded and installed. For those things, you would treat them like any other application installer, and you would make them a post-install task. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. All right. Any other last-minute questions, folks? Anything else? All right, nothing else, and I see folks dropping. Let me go ahead and say thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it, folks. We hope you found some value here, and if you did, we'd love to get some feedback from you. You can send an email to kketeam@case.com anytime you want to tell us anything positive, anything negative, give us any feedback, request any topics, anything and everything you want to share with us, we'd be happy to hear. Until next time, folks, have a great day. Bye now.